we're in the middle of a series right now called Made for More, and we're just looking at this question that everybody asks at some point in their life: isn't there more? Isn't there something else to this life? And really, there's two approaches that we're taking here, and one of them is to the person who doesn't know Christ at all. That purpose and that more, it's found in Jesus. It really is. The other person, which is probably most of us here, are people who believe in Christ, and we still have things in our life where we go, wait a minute, I believe in Jesus, and I'm still feeling like it's not quite all there. If we're really honest, we go through those moments. It would be awesome if we said, man, I believe in Jesus, and now everything's perfect, and I always feel good, and I'm always in a good mood, and I always feel like I have purpose, and everything is awesome always. I mean, if that person exists, like maybe you should be here, and we can switch places. It doesn't happen. And the reason for that is that we're still just people. We still have these minds that need to be renewed. We still have work in our lives. We still have faith to build. And so we go through times, even in our Christian walk, of discouragement, confusion, discontentment, desperation. And in our walks with God, and if you don't know Jesus, you probably ask these questions too, but even in our walks with God, we go, isn't there more? The answer is yes, absolutely, there's more. One of the problems that we have, and part of the reason that we often go through these cycles of we go down and we're up and we're down and we're up, part of the reason for that is because we try to find the answer to this question, isn't there more? We try to find the answer by building ourselves up. And it turns into a me approach. I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this, when the answer is really him. You know, recently I joined a gym. Well, my wife joined me to a gym. And so, it takes, a few weeks, and then, it's like, I'm like, oh man, I'm like starting to see a little improvement. I feel a little better. I play basketball like 3 times a week now, and ping pong twice a week. So it's ping pong, really serious stuff. I sweat playing ping pong. It's serious business. But, part of joining a gym is they give you a routine, right? So I get this, I have an app, and it gives me my workout routine. So it says, go to this machine and do this many reps with this much weight, right? And so I'm building myself up, right? I'm working out. I'm putting the work in. And what's funny is even in this, like I feel really encouraged. I feel better. I feel stronger. But I'll tell you what, it's a humbling experience to walk up to a machine after like an 80-year-old lady is on there and then like change the weight to lighter. True story. And that's like, oh man, what am I even doing here? But we try to build ourselves up, right? And then we hit these points where we go like, oh man, I'm awesome. And then it's like, yeah, you're not. That's how I felt at the gym. Like, man, I'm awesome. I'm getting strong. And then I have to go to this machine and put a lighter weight on after an old lady. I'm awesome. No, you're not. And we go through these cycles. We build ourselves up. And then we realize, like, man, I'm just not as awesome as I thought I was. And then it's even more crushing. And then you have this hill to climb. We go through this cycle. The problem there is we're always going, me, I. The truth is that we need to shift our focus. Realize that some things are just out of our control. Realize that God does allow you to go through circumstances that you cannot handle. He can. Where you're weak, he's strong. Where we're dumb, he's really smart. Where we're not so good, he's great. So we're going to shift our focus. And we find some direction here in Romans 12, verse 1. Paul says this, and this sounds like some direction from Paul, and really what we're finding here is the answer to this question, what's my purpose? What am I made for? Romans chapter 12, verse 1. He says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. It's a pretty big appeal. If I would to say it the way I would say it, like I appeal to you, brothers, by the mercies of God. It's serious. It's a big deal. By the mercies of God, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. What Paul's saying here, and you know, a lot of times we talk about worship. We talk about worship, and usually what we refer to when we talk about worship is the songs that we sing, and that's a part of it. The songs we sing are an expression of our worship. What Paul's saying here is to present your entire self, your body, your life as a sacrifice to God, which is your worship. We can live lives of worship with an attitude of worship. Our posture toward God is worshipful, and that should be expressed in ways such as singing. But Paul here is saying, present your body, your life, everything you are to God as a sacrifice. And this is worship. To get to this place of fulfillment, it starts with relationship with God. And the more you begin to know God and the more you learn about God, the more your life should become a life of worship. And when your life becomes a life of worship and you're turning to God and you're seeing Him for more of who He is and you begin to worship Him and you begin to speak about how good and live like He really is this omnipotent, omniscient, awesome, loving God, you're going to start to feel that fulfillment. It's not found in me, 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 me. It's found in Him. We're made for more. We're made to worship, not just in song, but with our entire life. And so there's a couple of ways that worship helps us. One, it's understand worship is about God. It's about turning to Him. It's about who He is. It's about what He's done. It's about how great He is. But worship affects us. And one way that it affects us is it keeps us humble. Arrogance is a snare. Because what arrogance does is it says me, 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 I. And eventually you're going to hit that place where it goes like, nope, you're not that great. I think we've all hit those places where we think we got it, we think we're it, and then it's like, nope, you're just not. And so when God says, worship me, what He's saying is don't put your trust in yourself because you're not that awesome. He is. And we need to stay humble so that we keep our faith in Him. We keep trying to build ourselves up. We end up comparing ourselves to other people. Sometimes that feels great, but eventually you're going to hit that place where you realize, I'm not what I thought I was. I'm not super awesome. And so God says, don't put your faith in men, put your faith in me. So we turn ourselves toward Him, and it keeps us humble. About 1,000 years before Jesus walked the earth, we had David. David was the one who killed Goliath with the sling as a boy. He eventually became king over all of Israel. Pretty big deal, right? Killed Goliath, became king. Well, there's a lot of stuff that happened between killing Goliath and becoming king. One of those things was that since David was ordained to be the next king, it was prophesied he's going to be our next king. And then David was really awesome and did cool things like killing Goliath. The current king, King Saul, got really jealous. He was very jealous of David. In fact, so jealous that he tried to kill David. And Granted, like let's give Saul a little bit of leeway here. While Saul was still king, people were doing things like singing songs that said, Saul kills our enemies by the thousands, but David by the tens of thousands. Yeah, that's probably going to get to a person. It's a little, he's going to be jealous. But he was chasing David, and he had spies, and he had people chasing David, trying to kill David. And one of these times, David was hiding, and he was running. Well, somebody recognized David. They said, hey, isn't this David? And so David, trying to get out of this, he started acting like he was crazy. He started hitting his head against the wall, and he started like foaming at the mouth and just acting all crazy. And then the people said like, oh, well, surely that's not him. And then he escaped. So kind of crazy story. And then after that, in response to that, David wrote a psalm. He wrote a poem, a song. And it's Psalm 34. Now understand, in this, David's being hunted. He has to act crazy to get out of it. His life is kind of crazy. Okay, he's being hunted by the most powerful man in the world. And here's how David responds. He says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. This psalm is a reflection of David's faith in God. He's telling us what he believes about God. This is David's posture towards God. It is his life of worship toward God. Your worship is an expression of your faith. It says something about what you believe. Sometimes we think worship is an expression of our emotion. It's not. Worship is an expression of our faith. What we're doing is we are acknowledging and we are responding to the greatness, the goodness, and the love of our Heavenly Father. That's what our lives should be, acknowledging and responding to the greatness and the goodness of God. That's a life of worship. That's what Paul was talking about, saying, present your bodies as living sacrifices. Acknowledge and respond to who God is. We were made for that. We find contentment and fulfillment in that. David's attitude of worship was showing in his acts of worship. And for us, our attitude toward God should show in our acts, in the way that we live, in the way that we interact with other people, in the way we sing. You guys sounded good today, by the way. I was talking to Jake earlier, and we sang that last song, When My Heart Is Torn Asunder. And I think we've only sang that once or twice before, but every time we sing that, everybody seems to know the words. I don't think it's like a really popular song that people know, but everybody seems to sing along. I don't know. It's a good song, I guess. Anyway, this worship, our singing, our interaction with people, everything we do is part of our worship toward God, presenting our bodies as living sacrifices. I want to notice a couple of things and point out a couple of things about David here. One is we see David's faith. We see how he responds toward God. We see sort of his posture toward God. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul, I love this, my soul makes its boast in the Lord. He says, I'm going to boast about God. You want to be arrogant? Be arrogant about how awesome God is. We're allowed to do that because he is. His response here to what he just went through, and this psalm is a response to the event that I described, David acting crazy and escaping from these people who were trying to kill him. His response here is not like, hey, look how clever I am. I tricked them. I'm so smart. It's not, they're never going to catch me. I'm going to be the king. It's, man, God is awesome. I'm going to boast about how great he is. David just did kind of a really clever, tricky thing, right? The other thing I want to point out here is that this word and what David says, he says, "Oh, magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together." It's not just, hey, I'm going to do this. He says, hey, you guys, come on. God is awesome. Let's magnify him together. And that word magnify is so important. You know, a lot of times when we think about magnify, immediately to me, I think of a magnifying glass, right? And you know, when I think of a magnifying glass, I automatically think of ants, right? You know, people do mean things to ants, but if you put a magnifying glass and you're looking at something really small, it makes a small thing bigger, right? And sometimes that's kind of how we think about God. We're magnifying him like, hey, we need to make this small thing bigger. You can't make God bigger. When we hear this term, magnify the Lord, let's not think about a magnifying glass. Let's think more in terms of like a telescope. Because a telescope doesn't make small things big. A telescope is designed to make far things near. You know, scientists have been working and developing more and more powerful telescopes. We have people, my nephew actually does this. He actually stares through a telescope and looks for inhabitable planets. That's his job. Like he just sits there looking through telescopes. Surely he does something other than this all day, but that's what he's doing. He's looking for planets out there. And that's what we do. We develop more and more powerful telescopes. We can look deeper into space. You know, for a long time, scientists thought that the biggest thing in the universe was something called the Sloan Great Wall. And the Sloan Great Wall is this structure that is actually built out of multiple galaxies that are strung together. I don't really understand it all, but galaxies strung together out in space. The Sloan Great Wall. The Sloan Great Wall is 1.4 billion light years wide. Now, let's do our best to comprehend what we're talking about here. Light years means if you were to travel at the speed of light, it would take you 1 year for a light year. So 1.4 billion light years. We're talking about an object in space. To go from one end to the other, let's start with this. If you could travel at the speed of light, you already lost me. Travel at the speed of light. That's ridiculous. I can't even get there. If you could get there, it would take you 1.4 billion years to get from one end of this structure to the other. This is a thing floating out in space. The Sloan Great Wall. And then, more recently, scientists discovered something else called the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall. It is 10 billion light years across. So if you were traveling at the speed of light for 10 billion years, you could get across this thing. None of those numbers are even making sense here. 10 billion? I can't imagine 10 billion anything. 10 billion years at the speed of light to get across. This thing's floating out in space. If you don't feel small enough yet, think about this. That thing has been floating out there as long as we've been around, and nobody ever found it. That's how big it is out there. And we say and we go, wow, that's really big. This is what it means to magnify the Lord. Let's search. Let's look deeper. Let's develop ourselves and experience more of him. And what you're going to find is, man, I thought 1.4 billion was a long time. But look, this is 10 billion. I thought I understood how much God loves me, but man, it goes deeper. I thought I understood what grace meant, but now I'm experiencing it even more. I thought I knew the love of God and it was so awesome and so big, but there's more. $10 billion light years is nothing to our great God. He holds that in his hand. He spoke, and it was. That's the greatness of our God. Magnify the Lord with me. This psalm is a reflection of David's faith. Boast in the Lord. Magnify the Lord. The more we seek, the more we're going to find. We magnify God in worship. If you're feeling like God's not enough, we need to change our posture toward him, our attitude toward him. Put down the magnifying glass and start looking through a telescope. And the funny thing is, God, he's not far. He's not far away. This is just our perception. He's close. He's here. We're seeking him. The more we seek, the more we find. We are made for more. We're made to worship. And in our worship of God, we find contentment. You know, this idea of worship, I'm kind of excited because in coming up pretty soon, we're gonna be talking more about worship and what it means and how we do it. And I'm really excited because I think we're going to get to hear from Jake on this. He's still a little unsure. I think he's gonna do great. But I'm excited about that. Because as we dive deeper into what it is to worship our God, we're going to start to experience him more and more. We're going to learn about his love more and more. It's going to become more of a reality to us in our lives. That worship, it's humbling. Sometimes we think about humbling in a bad way. It's not about us becoming less. It's about God becoming more. It's about recognizing him for who he is. Worship also encourages us, and these two things go together. When we worship and we recognize God, when we look through that telescope, when he becomes to us as great as he is, it's really hard for discouragement to exist. Because really, if you think about this, when we live lives of discontent and discouragement and despair, really what it reflects is a lack of faith. And to refuse a posture of worship toward God is really to deny his greatness. And we can't exaggerate God's greatness. Just like I don't think we could ever exaggerate how big the universe is, or how big the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall is. We can't even comprehend a thing that exists out there that God spoke. He's bigger and better. Are you made for more? Yeah. Why? Because you're made for him. And we can't even grasp how great and big and loving he is. And when I say something like, if you're discouraged, it's a lack of faith, I'm not telling you this to beat you down. Like, you just lack faith. Get over it. That's not the purpose here. The purpose is to tell you there's an answer. It gets better. There's more. That's the purpose. And the answer is to turn toward Him and put our faith in Him and start living like we believe what we say we believe. God is big and powerful and loving and good. To worship Him is to express our faith. You know, David, when we looked at David's situation, we saw David kind of celebrating, right? I mean, he had a rough go at this point in his life. It was a difficult time. The most powerful man in the world was trying to kill him. It's a rough go. He had to act like he was crazy and hit his head against the wall to escape. But still, he was kind of celebrating, right? He was like, hey, that was awesome. I got away. God's great. And I know some of you probably have been at points where you go, could I just get a small victory like that? I'd be happy to hit my head against the wall and foam at the mouth if it meant just the smallest, slightest victory. Like, give me something to go, God, thank you, you're awesome. Little victory. Give me something here. Not everyone in the Bible worshiped only in celebration. And David had times where he went through more difficult things and he still worshiped. But I think nobody in the Bible had a rougher go than Job. Job was someone who went through some of the most difficult things. And I just want to describe to you the beginning of Job's problems. The beginning of his problems went like this. He was wealthy, had children, livestock, servants. The beginning of his problems went, all of his animals were stolen or killed. All of his servants were killed. His house was knocked down by a storm with his children in it. And they all died. That's the beginning of Job's problems. I think we can't even comprehend what that would be like. Everything taken from you, your children included. Can't imagine. Job was someone that God was proud of. It's funny, you know, we look at this story of Job, and, you know, sometimes we kind of teach it like, hey, Satan was looking at Job and going, hey, God, Job's just happy because he has all this stuff. When in reality, if you read the story of Job, God was the one that brought Job up. God was talking to Satan, and he goes, hey, have you considered Job? Look at this guy. Thanks, God. That's when Satan says, oh, well, he's just like that because all the stuff, and God goes, all right, go for it. In step one, we're not even going to get into step 2, 3, 4. Step one was all of his stuff was taken from him. His house was crushed with his children in it. And I want to look at why I believe God was proud of Job. Why God said, hey, Satan, check out Job. It was because of Job's response. And we find it in Job chapter 1, verse 20. After all of this happened, then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshiped. He's grieving. To the point where he's falling on the ground. He's broken. His whole world has fallen apart. His response? Worship. Why? Because it doesn't matter what's going on in life. God is still God. God is still good. God is still holy. God is still great. God still deserves our worship. Now, I will say, if you find yourself not understanding, it's okay to talk things out with God. It's okay to say, God, I don't get it. It's okay. You can even shake your fist and be mad. He's not going to smite you. Job didn't understand what was going on. But a part of what he did, his response was to worship God. That should be our response in life no matter what's happening. To have not only moments of worship, but an attitude and a posture of worship towards God, remembering how big and great and loving He is, and then living like we believe it. I think this is part of what James meant when he said, hey, faith without works is dead. If we believe that there truly is this awesome, big, loving, great God out there, shouldn't we be responding to that? This is what we were created for. This is where things are made right when we have the correct view of God. When we're looking through that telescope and we're seeing how great and big He is. Even though we don't feel it, we don't see it, we can still seek Him for understanding. He is great, He is big, He is loving. So wherever you're at today, if you're feeling discouragement, confusion, discontentment, desperation, number one, the answer is in Jesus. God sent His Son, Jesus, to die on a cross for the forgiveness of our sins so that we could be made right with Him. In that relationship, you're going to find more contentment than you would ever imagine. But we still have these minds that struggle. And things like worship are a gift that we can experience more of God, that we can realize more of Him. So today I'm challenging you to work on changing your mindset, our posture towards God. Seeking Him. Not looking at Him with a magnifying glass, but looking at Him with a telescope. Searching. Looking deeper. Not so a small God can be made big, but a God that we feel is far can be near. Living a life of worship, being a living sacrifice. This is what it is to truly worship Him. Because a life that is living like we believe that there is this big, great, loving, great God out there who loves us, who died for us, who cares so deeply about us. In a life like that, it's very difficult for things like discontentment and discouragement to thrive. They can't exist in that atmosphere, an atmosphere of worship. Let's start living like we believe that God is who He says He is, taking steps, and those steps are going to look different for everybody. Some of those steps we make while we're sitting here singing songs. Some of those steps we make in our relationships. Because God is so fulfilling and good, we don't need people to fulfill us. We have God to fulfill us, and that creates healthy relationships. That's worship. That's a life of worship when you take steps and live like you believe God is who He says He is. That's an expression of faith. That's what it is to be a living sacrifice. You're made for more. You are made for worship.